If you think a poll is a poll is a poll, well, you haven't been listening to Poll Hub for very long. This time, we're talking with CNN's polling director about the network's new initiative to report only on numbers from credible polls. Will it make any difference in our increasingly fact-free media environment? We are going to ask. Also, one last, we promise, mention of the census, well, at least until 2029, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And we are very happy to have with us Jennifer Agiesta, who is Director of Polling and Election Analytics at CNN. We're going to talk a little bit about what that all is about. But the important thing for today is that you have recently issued a statement which got a lot of attention about what you guys are going to do when all these polls that are around. So let's talk a little bit about the parts that you think are going to make polls good to cover and bad to cover.
Sure. We are rolling out some new polling standards. I should say before I start, of course, that CNN has always had some kind of polling standards. It's not like we just report on every poll we come across.
Right. I think that's a really good point because it does suggest that there haven't been any standards for polling and reporting in the past.
Right. We have had them in the past, and they have traditionally been that we would only report on surveys that were done using probability-based sampling. And for a long time, that meant we were only covering telephone polls. And in recent years, that's brought in a little bit of online work in that we've covered polls that have used probability-based online panels. And I'm sort of assuming that your listeners have some knowledge of what probability-based probably means.
We've talked to death about that with them,
okay,
yes.
So good. So I don't
we have very knowledgeable Poll
that
Hub audience, yeah.
Good. And, as polling has changed and we see more and more people producing polls that are not strictly probability-based, it kind of got to a point where it's like we have to have standards that match the reality of what survey research is today. And so these questions were kind of designed with that in mind, to look at the people who are doing research in the most sort of up-to-date and careful ways and are really being thoughtful in their design process.
So does this mean that you've somehow broadened the number of questions that pollsters need to answer before you would report on a particular poll?
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit more intensive than what we would have wanted to know in the past. I mean, I'm looking for more details about the sort of sampling that you're using to select the people that you're going to survey and how you're weighting those numbers on the back end. I mean, we wanted some information about those things in the past, but I was never really looking for quite as much detail as I am now. And that just really reflects the reality that it is very difficult to do survey research right now. And if you're not thinking these choices through carefully and fully, you're probably missing something.
I assume also, Jennifer, that you are getting questions from producers within CNN, and this is a way not only of communicating to the external community, but it's also telling your folks, here's what works and here's what doesn't work and here's what you should be using. I mean, I think part of it is a service internal, an educational tool internal to CNN. I assume that's part of the goal here.
Yeah, I think that is part of it. I mean, we have at CNN a fairly intensive review process for almost anything that's sort of source-based that we're reporting on. We have to get approval for sources, to put things on air. We have to know that they know what they are saying, right? And so this is essentially taking that process and saying, let's treat polling and research the same way we are treating information that we get from people, that it should be thoroughly vetted, that we should have confidence and faith in what it is, and not just because it's a number, assume that it is correct.
How much of this
Which I think
is
a lot
driven,
of journalists do.
Yeah. How much of this is driven by the huge proliferation of polls and the coverage that they get? I mean, we started hearing poll coverage on all the cable networks and in the newspapers and on blogs of the 2020 race in 2017 practically, right? It started so long ago. How much of this is that there's so much polling out there and so much of it does not is not at the same level as the CNN poll, Marist poll, Fox News poll, Quinnipiac, some of these other polls that do a really solid scientific job?
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. I mean, I think at the same time that it has become incredibly hard to do really good, thoughtful research, it's become a lot cheaper to do the bad stuff. So you can get a sample, and I'm doing air quotes that you can't see. You can get a sample
I saw that.
of people for not very much money and put out a poll for a couple $1,000. And that's, that could get you some attention and some credibility, but maybe it shouldn't. Maybe you're not making the right choices.
So what is the automatic kicker outer of all this? When
a technical term.
A technical term. As someone
we can always count on Lee to use appropriate polling jargon.
So someone does a poll, and you guys see. I mean, what's the first thing? What's an automatic oh boy, we're not going with that one? That was a little bit better phrased.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that have always been, no-go land for CNN's coverage, right?
No-go land, that's much better.
even more technical. We've never really covered things like polls that are released by a campaign, right? If a campaign releases their own numbers, they're generally doing that because they want to get something out of it. And so we don't consider that to be a real gauge of where the race might be. We have not really covered IVR polling, and we're certainly not going to start now. So that's one thing that's a hard line we're drawing.
And that's interactive voice response, where there's no interviewer. Everything is automated, and it's usually done by telephone. Can include cell phones and a lot of other things.
Yeah, so it really limits the number of people that you can talk to, and I think that the way the public is currently reacting to the substantial increase in robocalls that are not necessarily surveys probably has made the response rates for those polls even worse than they were to begin with. So that's a big no for us. And I think also one of the other ones that's kind of a unique to online, I think, is using a sort of completely unrepresentative sample source. Like if you're drawing just from a pool of people who visit one particular website or use one particular app to get to surveys, that's not really going to be up to snuff for us. So those are some of the things where we're drawing a hard line.
So much of what gave polling a bad name in 2016 was not the polls. It wasn't your poll. It wasn't our poll. It was the polling aggregators and averagers and all of these kind of new tools, if you want to generously call them that. How do you handle that? Because I got to imagine the producers on Jay DeDapper's show or any of your political shows are saying, well, wait, we want to use the RCP average. We want to use some of these aggregators. It's newsworthy. How do you deal with that, and how are they going to be judged? How are you going to use the aggregators and the other kind of new tools and tricks?
That is a very tricky question. I mean, we have tried to steer our reporters and anchors away from averages calculated by other people because we don't necessarily know what goes into those. So we do occasionally put out our own averages of polling on a certain topic, but we tend to wait for a moment when there have been, a meaningful number of polls conducted within a reasonable time frame so that we're not averaging over 6 months to get a number on a horse race or something like that. And we tend to only include polls that have similar methodologies or similar bases. So particularly when you're looking at things like a horse race in a general election, at some point there's a mix of polls that are adults and polls that are registered voters and polls that are likely voters. So if we're doing an average that we're going to report, we tend to say, okay, we're only averaging the ones that use registered voters or only averaging the ones that use likely voters, depending on where we are in the cycle, that kind of thing. So we try to provide something for our anchors and reporters to have on that front. And of course, we do have Harry Anton working on his own forecasts, and that will be a very helpful tool. I do think,
as long as he doesn't take any more pictures with Chris Cuomo. I don't know if you saw that. It was tweeted. It was not a great moment in a polling photography.
Well,
just to be clear, Harry is our number one guest on this show. We've had him on more than anybody else, and we love him. So this is coming from a place of love.
Good. We love him at CNN too. So, so we have some of those tools available for our reporters if they want them. But I think it does raise the challenge of how you convey the uncertainty that's inherent in any kind of survey research when you're doing something that's supposed to increase the accuracy, but there's no way to really quantify that, right? I mean, we know the margin of error of an individual poll, but what's the margin of error of an average of 5 polls? There's no way to really put a number on that. So that's a big challenge for journalism.
The one thing I struggle with, particularly when we get in the heat of the campaigns, is each cycle seems to have an enormous number of polls that we've never heard of before, and organizations that we're not really sure where they came from or where they're in what their intent may be. Now, they may not be campaign polls, but in the past we've seen polls, and some of them appear methodologically to be legitimate, but are being paid for by PACs or other organizations or groups that may have a particular, candidate, in the PAC. So how will you be addressing that kind of an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think poll sponsorship is one of those things that we do look at in assessing a poll's validity and whether we can report it. And there have been times when we have just been uncomfortable with the sponsor of a poll because of their particular political leanings or interest in an issue. And of course, if somebody's not going to tell us who paid for their poll, we're just not going to cover it. We need to know. We know polling is a very expensive endeavor, and so we need to know where all that money is coming from. So it is a thing that we're considering, but it's not the only consideration in our list.
Yeah, so it all comes down to election night, and I know at the AP and the Washington Post, and you worked with Edison Research, who does the national exit polls. So you've been there on election night. I know at the APOR conference in Toronto, you were on a panel discussing the exit polls. What is your take on where we are as a polling community in terms of exit polls and the new project that's been initiated too?
I think exit polls are still a hugely valuable tool. It is really the only piece of research out there where we know for sure that we're talking to actual voters. I mean, we see them walk out of the polling place, and that's a pretty good sign that they have actually turned out to vote. So I think that their place in our election night reporting process is a very important one. I'm interested to follow and see where the project that AP and Fox are working on goes. I mean, I think with one election under their belt, it's kind of hard to evaluate how it's going so far. And obviously, we're a little bit of a competitor at this point, so
sure.
It's challenging to evaluate from that standpoint. But I think that exit polling done in the traditional way with the adaptations that we have made to adjust for the ways that people vote today is an incredibly valuable piece of election night reporting.
So the gold standard isn't tarnished yet?
I don't think so, no.
But it is all about transparency, and we very much appreciate the fact that CNN has taken the lead on what consumers should look at and what you will be looking at as we go forward into our crazy polling campaign season. So we hope to talk to you again as this unfolds, and to learn more about what you're seeing and what the polls can tell us about what's going on. So thank you very much, Jen. We very much appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's a topic that we have hit upon, maybe once or twice or maybe 30 times in the last year, is the U.S. Census. And the reason is that there was an attempt by the Commerce Department, which runs the U.S. Census Department, to add a question about citizenship. It became a huge political hot potato, went to the Supreme Court. The president threatened to basically say, to heck with you, Supreme Court, I'm going to do it anyway. And at the last minute decided to stand down. the reason we talked about it and we're interested in it is that there was the suggestion, and there's been some research to suggest that in asking that question, you would depress the number of Latinos who would answer the census, and that would drive down the numbers. And the census is important in a lot of ways, but it's important to the polling community because that's how we get our kind of fundamental data so that we can compare against that count of all the other polling we do. So, all good? It's not going to be on there? Everybody happy? Where are we at?
Well, I think the administration's going to go to various executive agencies now and try to get whatever census information, citizen information that those agencies have, be it Social Security, Department of State, Health and Human Services.
Did you say Homeland Security?
Yes, no, of course, Homeland Security.
We'll say it twice.
Yeah, one of the things I think that this has already done is it has sort of had a potentially intimidating effect because this, first of all, people who are concerned about the census know perhaps that this has become the hot potato. They don't know necessarily about what Wilbur Ross is doing and Donald Trump and what it does for Congress, redistricting and all that kind of stuff. But something about the census may now be somewhat tainted for people. So it may indirectly have already caused some of the political outcomes that the administration seemed to have wanted in all this.
Well, and I don't think the issue goes completely away either. I think it is a political talking point. I think we're going to hear more about it, not necessarily specifically about the question, but in terms of identifying people who are citizens and those who are not. I think that the Trump administration is going to move forward, bringing that information together from all of the executive departments in the federal government to try to find out exactly how many undocumented people are in the United States. And that's certainly going to continue.
And the thing that remains to be seen, but was certainly suggested out by the president, is that some states, he basically said, go ahead and reapportion, do your redistricting based on voters, not population, not adults in the population. So when you count voters or citizens versus adults, when you start narrowing your definition of who gets to count, then you may have a very different number or makeup of your congressional delegation that goes.
Yeah,
that's going to end up. That is assuredly.
But those are constitutional issues,
that's
which will then
just
Supreme Court. Start to have more court challenges.
This is not the first time that there's been politics associated with the census. I mean, we've had issues about, there's statistical weighting, there's adjustments made, and sometimes people have criticized the process of just what happens to the numbers. But I don't think we've seen anything like the census being politicized like we've seen this time. But and it's really much more severe.
But at the end of the day, for the polling community, the resolution of this is that we can expect good, solid, accurate numbers from the census that will start in 2020 and will be released. The numbers will be released in 2021.
And that will indeed do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith, sitting to my right, is our executive producer. Clap, clap, clap. And Casey Schaff is editing all this fine prose that we've done.
Yeah, that is high praise. We, as we always do, thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University for our opportunity to look back in time at survey questions and survey data. It makes it so much more interesting for us to be able to talk about what has been and what questions have been asked and what people have been thinking about when you talk about current results, and we are very thankful for them and all the good work that they do.
And if you really do want to reach out and talk to a pollster, please do. We're on social media at Marist Poll on Twitter or Marist Poll on Facebook. And please don't forget to subscribe.
And just ask for Barb.
I thought you were going to give Lee's cell phone number out.
See you next week.